So just by way of introduction, the rules of kashrut are much too complicated for us to go into in real depth. I've sort of spent a lot of time the last couple of days trying to find like one source that could teach you the basic things that you need to know about some of these like humongous concepts that you could spend an entire month kind of full-time studying and only scratch the surface. And the answer is that because the like most foundational sources on them are so complicated, meaning the foundational concepts in kashrut come from some of the most complicated sugyot in the Bavli. So it's basically impossible to like teach these sources inside, because then the way they get taught over in like classic halachic literature is through like case law that doesn't, that's also hard to understand. So the whole system of kashrut is like a really beautiful, intricate, complete system that even when like you're studying it full time, you study it once through and then you study it again in order to actually understand it, because like any kind of closed system, you have to know everything in order to really understand anything. So you like try and start with these fundamentals, but in order to understand the fundamentals, you have to understand the really complicated stuff. So anyways, all this to say, I normally present like 12-page source sheets at these classes, and that was really not in the cards for tonight. So, what?
Glad you didn't go to the trouble.
Yeah. But I do have a kind of an outline, and we'll look at some sources inside, which you'll see on the back. And that is that. So, okay, so some basic things about kashrut. Were you to just read the Torah, you would know a lot of important things. You would know that you can't eat blood, you would know you can't eat bugs, you would know you can't cook meat and milk together, or you could at least understand that from the text. You would know that possibly you would figure out somehow that meat that of the animals that the Torah explains are kosher, they need to be like killed in a certain way. You might be able to figure that out from the Torah. But there's a lot of basic things that underlie our understanding of kashrut that really, like, you could read the Torah beginning to end many times over and you wouldn't find them there. One of those is a concept that non-kosher things give off flavor, and that flavor has the ability to impart not kosherness in like almost to the same degree, potentially at least, in the right density as the not kosher thing itself. So if there's enough flavor of a non-kosher thing inside of something, that can make that thing not kosher, even if there's no actual like piece of anything not kosher there. Does that make sense? So that's called ta'am, and there's a debate whether that is actually like a Torah concept. The debate is called ta'am keikar deoraita or deravanan, or whether that's a rabbinic concept that more or less has no bearing on what we're going to talk about tonight. But if you want to spend a month of your life studying one subject in Hilchot Kashrut, that could be one of them. Okay, so then here's another implication of ta'am, is that it can get absorbed into utensils. So right, you could read the Torah beginning to end, and you would know maybe if you captured a utensil from like a Midianite, then you would have to like pass it through water or pass it through fire before integrating it into your house. But you wouldn't necessarily understand that there's like outlines on there. You wouldn't necessarily understand that utensils can absorb flavor, and that they absorb, the rules about absorption of flavor are quite complicated, but basically through heat or through a combination of like spiciness plus pressure, you can impart flavor into items, and items that have flavor inside of them can then give that off under the right circumstances. So it's not just edibles that can give off non-kosher status, it's also things that come into contact with edibles under circumstances primarily of heat. Yeah.
Is it the same with like meat and dairy?
So
like
meat and dairy is just
yes. Meaning like if you have like, even if there's no milk in the thing, if it's like a milk thing, then the meat can like absorb the milk.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's the same concept.
Yeah, it's the same concept.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, flavor works very similarly in basar v'chalav. The different thing about meat and milk is just that you start out with two permissible things, that only the combination thereof becomes not permissible.
Right.
As opposed to like a bug or a piece of pig, which is just a much simpler thing to deal with. But right, so like let's say, right, so let's say I have a not kosher, dairy absorbed into, totally kosher dairy absorbed into a dairy vessel. So then if that vessel comes into contact with meat under the right circumstances, of heat, of it hasn't been used of it has been used within the last 24 hours, of blah, 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 then you will have created a combination of milk and meat.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the other piece of this, that again, like you would not be able to read the Torah and figure out that that is a thing, but it's a very important piece of the way we practice kashrut in our homes and in the world. So those are two just like really basic things. Okay, so then you might want to say, when we're talking about restaurants or any kosher item that's not like, meaning there's like a fundamental difference between like I went to the supermarket and bought an apple versus I went to the supermarket and bought this like processed thing. Anything that's been like, that is not a raw ingredient, that's been processed, you start to have a lot of questions. So those questions might be, do I actually, I'm starting at the bottom of I'm in 2D right now, but like the first question is, okay, so like this is a processed thing that contains more than one ingredient in it. So I have an ingredients list. It looks like it's this thing that I recognize, but is it actually that thing? And how do I know? So we have like a trust problem, and especially when you're buying something that's like not made by a person who you can talk to, you have all sorts of problems because there's all sorts of laws that regulate like what you can call an ingredient, what things don't have to appear on ingredients lists at all, like percentages, all of that stuff. So that's just part of why like hashgacha is important in general, why things need kosher supervision, is because even if you just have an ingredients list and you're like, I understand what all the things are in this ingredients list and they are all kosher items, first of all, the ingredients list might not be true. Second of all, it might just be misleading, or there might be things that matter. Working our way up. Bugs are a really big problem in kashrut. They're a problem in restaurants, they're a problem in facilities, and like people don't, like one of the big things when we go into a restaurant for any kind of kosher supervision is show us how you're washing your lettuce. Or it'll be actually like the mashgiach needs to wash the lettuce for you. Different hashgachot have different kosher supervising agencies have different like practices for that. But certainly like that is something we pay really careful attention to, because eating whole bugs, even if they're dead, is a huge kashrut problem. So no one's gonna put out a dish in front of you and be like, here is my cooked kale salad that consists of only kale, and also worms. No one's gonna tell you about the worms part. They might not even know about the worms part, but like if you're like me and you like eat a lot of kale, you'll know that like you can find all sorts of exciting things inside your kale. So kale needs to be, any leafy greens that have to be checked rather carefully. Okay.
So but that would apply like even if you're not going to like a restaurant, you could go to a Jewish person's house and that could be the case.
Absolutely. That could apply anywhere. Yes.
I'm just saying, like, if you're not like only eating at people that do the same things that like a hashgacha would do.
Right.
Like, I feel like there's a lot of people like the CRC won't let you eat like asparagus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
right. Well, right. And there's a lot of different opinions about, because part of it is also like, what does it mean to check for bugs? Do I need to use technology to check for bugs? Right. Do I need to like, can I just use my eyes and the normal light in my kitchen? Do I need a backlight? Like there's all these different halachic approaches nowadays to bug checking. The CRC is, in my opinion, like particularly stringent.
Right.
I definitely eat asparagus. If you're interested, I can talk to you about how I check it for bugs, but whatever. Anyways, yes. bugs are a problem in many different settings, not just in restaurants. But just to be able to say, right, like you might say, I'm going to a restaurant, I know what all the ingredients are kosher. So now as we're moving up this list, it gets even more complicated. So anything that is in the category of harif, so it's a spicy or a hot thing. Common examples are garlic, onions. There's very few foods that don't have garlic and onions in them. People who have like dietary problems where they can't eat garlic and onions will tell you like their lives are really hard because garlic and onions are in everything. Chilies, things that are meant to be like hot, those are also harif. Basically, the like foundational rule with harif is that they have the ability to like awaken taste. So let's say you're using a knife that was used for let's just do a normal thing that might happen in anyone's kitchen. You're using a knife that you used for meat for like at any point you used it on hot meat in the last like ever. And now you've cut your onion with it. Your onion is now meat. Your onion is basically a piece of meat, right? So like the harif items have the ability to absorb flavor from knives, and they overcome all sorts of other leniencies that we might, like if you use your meat knife to cut a completely cold piece of cheese, that would have fewer problems than using your meat knife to cut an onion, potentially. I mean, your onion now is just meat, that's fine, like, but you have to like be careful what you do with that onion, yeah.
Sorry, just a quick question. Is the onion meat equipment or meat?
So that's a little bit complicated, but
like you don't become fleishik if you eat it.
so there's different opinions about that,
really?
fascinatingly enough, but mostly it's like meat equipment.
Like you just wouldn't put it with dairy, like you'd have
Yeah,
to
you wouldn't, and cooking it with dairy would be a big problem.
But if you ate it with something parb, you wouldn't become fleishik.
If you ate it with something parb, so
like a veggie burger with an
right.
onion on it.
So mostly we would say no, but there are opinions that would say yes.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, harif is really serious. Like it's really like because the idea in harif is that it's as if you like the pressure of the knife combined with the spiciness of the onion, let's say, creates heat. So then that heat, it's as if you cooked it with meat. So like if you like in the halachic imagination, like an extreme understanding of harif, which is not shared universally, classic, is that right? It's as if you took an onion and cooked it with like ground beef, like by cutting it with your meat knife. So that would be like an extreme version of what has happened. But then also these like spicy items have the ability, it's called like to reawaken flavor that's embedded in a utensil. So that's another big problem. So let's say, okay, I know it's an onion. I know what happens, like onions are kosher, onions grow on the ground, of course they're kosher. Well, like was that onion cut with something? Was it cut with something that was at any point ever used for basically any non-kosher hot food? All of a sudden you have a problem. Okay, and then you have items that like, they're in categories within which exist kosher things, right? There exists in the world kosher cheese, there exists in the world kosher wine, there exists in the world kosher fats. However, there also exists in the world non-kosher cheeses, non-kosher wines, and non-kosher fats. So you might be able to say, okay, like, what is a donut? A donut is like water and flour and grease, like that all, and sugar, that all sounds totally fine to me, right? Well, what is that grease? Is that grease lard? Because now you're in big trouble. Stan's Donuts, those are made out of lard. So like literally...
Is that here?
It's across the street on Broadway.
Yeah.
So
that
like...
was like a whole thing when it opened.
Yes, which is what makes it like a great Lakeview example. Because people are like, ooh, Stan's Donuts, like maybe can you get the mashkacha? And it's like, absolutely not. These are straightforwardly pig. Like you cannot, there's no way to like, it's not like an easy fix to like totally change your recipe. Because, and a lot of baked goods in the world, meaning like if you watch like the Great British Baking Show or whatever, like pies are made with lard, of course they are, you know, like da da da. Like, right, so you might think like, oh, it's a pie, like pies can be kosher, yeah, they can be kosher, but only if you like really know what the ingredients are that you're talking about and the way it was cooked and a million things, right? So to say like, oh, I keep ingredients kosher is already, like, I hope, that's what I'm trying to peel away at. Like, there's no such thing as ingredients kosher, because even without all this, like, transfer of flavor and blah, 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 like, the ingredients themselves might just straightforwardly be not what you think they are, because ingredients are not disclosed, or there's language that is ambiguous whether it's kosher or not, or because there's bugs, or because people are straightforwardly lying to you, or because it truthfully is an onion, but it was cut with a knife that was used for other things and now has become treif. Okay? So, like, ingredients kosher, these are just some examples, but probably the primary ones. Knowing what ingredients are in something does not get you all that far. Okay, so then you could say, okay, but like, what if actually I know what all the ingredients are, and actually they're like actually kosher? So then, like, why can't I eat them if they're cooked in the premises of a not kosher establishment? Okay, so now we have a few different elements. So one is a concept called bishul akum. Bishul akum applies to food cooked, well, the meaning of the words is foods cooked by Gentiles. So first of all, it's cooked and not baked, so that's just like an interesting thing. Things that are baked by Gentiles have different and usually more stringent rules, except for if it's bread, in which case it's more lenient, but we're going to leave bread to the side. It's actually really complicated. Basically, historically, like, Jews ate bread cooked in non-kosher bakeries, and so then, like, how do we, like, now no one would really tell you that you can do that in any regular way, and some of that is because the nature of bakeries has changed. Some of that is, like, our ability to, like, bake our own stuff has, like, risen in the world. Like, the problem with bread is that it needs to be cooked at a high temperature, and getting an oven that could do that was complicated. So you would have Jews and non-Jews sharing oven, like Tosfot would talk about Jews and non-Jews sharing ovens for the purpose of bread baking. So bread is actually different, but, like, let's just talk about things that are cooked. So bishul akum applies to anything that is, like, fancy. The language is like ola al shulchan malachim. It would go up on a king's table. So that opens up exceptions to bishul akum of anything that is not fancy. And then the other piece of it is it's not bishul akum if it's an item that could be eaten raw, if it's ne'echal kamo shu chai. So if someone were to serve you, if a non-Jew were to serve you carrots that were made in a kosher oven using kosher utensils, kosher everything, and the only, like, monkey wrench is that the non-Jew made it, then that would be completely fine and you could eat the carrots, because carrots are ne'echal kamo shu chai. Carrots can be eaten raw. Or if a non-Jew, let's say, popped popcorn for you, that would be another interesting example of not that it's necessarily ne'echal kamo shu chai, because the kernels of popcorn are not really food, but it's not fancy. So if you had, like, if you were, like, completely certain that movie theater popcorn was just popcorn without anything on it, or, like, with just salt on it, or you knew, or whatever, then, like, potentially that's something that you could eat, because the rules of bishul akum would allow you to eat that, because it's not fancy. However, if you're going to a restaurant, then chances are you're in the category in the world of bishul akum, where the fact that a non-Jew made it without Jewish involvement, right? I should mention that, like, bishul akum can also be like the question of, like, how minimal does Jewish involvement need to be in order for it not to be in the world of bishul akum is very interesting. So kind of, again, another shiur for another time, but some people will say, oh, if a Jew set a timer, or if a Jew turned on the oven, I mean, a Jew turned on the oven, I think everyone would agree that would make it not bishul akum. What if the Jew lights the pilot light that then the non-Jew every day lights the burners from? Does that make it not bishul akum? That's like an interesting question. Yes. But so whatever, there's, like, a lot of opinions that go into that, and the ramifications for that are quite substantial for places that have hashgacha, because if you want to say it's bishul akum until a Jew comes in every day and turns on the burner for you, then the mashgiach needs to be the first person there every day, right? So when you're in the world of, like, kosher establishments, that those questions become super interesting and exciting. But in the world of non-kosher establishments, you have to assume everything is without Jewish involvement. Yeah.
So, how does like a Krispy Kreme get certification?
How does
Krispy Kreme, like, how does any dairy place that doesn't have any Jews in it get certification? Because there's definitely places like that.
Yeah.
They have
So there's probably a Jew at the factory who's involved in the meaning at a Krispy Kreme, they're not cooking anything from scratch there. So at the factory, there is probably a mashgiach who's there, or who's there often enough to like turn off and then turn back on the functionings of the factory.
So the reason individual ones aren't is just because like they sell other stuff there?
Or there's multiple factories, or there's like a whole product stream, right? Or they're selling other stuff.
Like in West Rogers Park, there's a kosher Dunkin' Donuts, and like 4 blocks away, there's a not kosher one.
Right. Well, not kosher Dunkin' Donuts typically sell like pig products.
Right, but that wouldn't be like anything having to do with the donuts if they're not cooked there.
Right. So that there's a lot of people are very invested in that question, which are in areas where like the primary distribution of donuts to Dunkin' Donuts is from a factory that is kosher and serves the kosher Dunkin' Donuts. Can I go into the not kosher Dunkin' Donuts and buy a donut? And the answer to that, it basically requires knowledge. It requires feeling confident that they're only getting their donuts from that one place. It requires, I don't know, not that much beyond that. But yeah, like it would basically require research. But then also, like, you would want, like, if you're a resident of West Rogers Park, like, you would want to go support the kosher Dunkin' Donuts.
Of course, no, I'm just saying, like.
So I think that, and you would want to know that, like, no one, meaning even in a kosher Dunkin' Donuts, there might not be they're often cooking at Dunkin' Donuts, so I don't want to, like, speak with confidence about Dunkin' Donuts as an example.
I thought they make the donuts.
They do not make the donuts in the stores. They get them delivered in the mornings.
Oh.
But they, what was I about to say?
Krispy Kremes make the donuts. They just probably make them from dough that's already been made. So probably dough is delivered and then they bake them.
I don't think you're right. They make them in the stores?
I've seen them made. Like, yeah, they for sure fry them.
So then they have a way of doing it where there's a mashgiach that comes in and turns it on or something like that.
It's not though.
I don't know enough about it
There's
to
like a
tell you.
kosher, well, wouldn't get like a
Krispy
stuff
Kreme.
if they didn't.
But they probably get like the dough and then they just.
But for the
But the
frying part,
heating,
they
the
still
frying
need someone
part
to
would
do it.
probably require.
But there was one.
There are kosher Krispy. There's a kosher
There's
Krispy
kosher
Kreme like at Penn
in Penn
Station
Station,
in New
yeah.
York, classically.
Right,
Yeah.
and
But they're for sure not making them there.
No, but in the ones around, I've seen
But maybe those ones don't have
Maybe,
hashgacha.
or they had a mashgiach
They
that
do.
came and turned on the fire.
Right, it could be
No,
someone who
no,
drops by at
no,
4 a.m.
no.
and then leaves
Right.
also. Because if
Would
all
maybe not know
the
about it. Like it'd be someone that
There's
just
no
comes
way.
and turns. They would just have to turn it on at the beginning of the day.
I don't know enough about it, so I'm gonna not speculate. But like my guess is that if it's like under a decent kashrut certification agency, you could even call them up to ask. But for sure they have a way around it, and for sure a Jew is involved in the cooking process.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you one other question about Bishalakam? Is there like, I don't know, not like a list, but or is there something that says like what is a fancy thing and what's not? Like let's say your nanny was like cooking eggs for your kid.
So that is I love talking about this, because actually, the question of whether Bishul Akum is like culturally dependent is really interesting. Like, does the proliferation of sushi make all fish no longer Bishul Akum? Because everyone now eats raw fish.
Right.
Whereas like when my parents were growing up, like, why would you eat raw fish? That's gonna kill you.
Right.
And eggs are almost the opposite. Like no one eats raw eggs. But like when my parents were growing up, like my Gemara teacher in high school, this is when I first learned Bishlakim, he was like, yeah, eggs are totally fine. Anyone can make eggs. When I was growing up and I wanted to get strong, this is a line in Beauty and the Beast also.
Yeah.
I ate 12 dozen eggs every morning to help you get strong. Right, so like a Gaston eats,
Yeah.
drinks raw eggs.
That's like a thing for like bodybuilders and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And probably our concerns about like eggs and salmonella are like massively overblown. So like probably eggs are really safe to eat, but like culturally people don't do it anymore.
Right.
So does that affect Bishul Akum? Which is like a really interesting question also.
Right.
And people have different opinions about it. But yeah.
But I meant even more like not from the raw to like not raw thing, but like the
Is it
fanciness.
fancy?
Like maybe not eggs, like I don't know, like noodles or something. Like mac and cheese, which like is never fancy or something, you know? Like would that be, like how do you determine what's fancy and what's not?
Right, so that's a big question. And like who gets to determine it? And you want to be like part of a community where everyone kind of like holds the same way.
Right.
So that's a challenge, right? Because like definitely you can go to like fancy dairy restaurants and they'll be serving fancy mac and cheese.
Right.
But then it's like, okay, but like wacky mac.
Right, yes, whatever, the lowest level, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we can talk about specifics in your house, not at this moment.
Yeah. No, I just meant like more generally like how you determine what is and isn't fancy.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not super straightforward. And then, so bishalakum usually a problem in restaurants, and the fact that it's being served at a restaurant makes it fancy, right? Like, it's really hard to be like, I mean, unless, right, like the exception to this would be like, we are a raw vegan place, in which case, like, okay, first of all, no one's cooking because it's raw. Second of all, clearly everything that is being served there can be served raw because it is in fact being served raw. But like otherwise, if it's being served at a restaurant, it is presumably fancy enough to qualify for bishalakum. Okay, and then the next thing is some of the stuff from number one that we were talking about. So in terms of the utensils. So there's all sorts of, if in your home kitchen something goes wrong, you would want to like, oh, like I accidentally cooked this dish in this like meat thing and my dairy, whatever, like that is a situation in which you would want to call or Rockenfeld or me or whoever you ask your questions to, because you're in a b'diavad situation, like it happened already. And two, there's all sorts of leniencies, like, oh, have you not used the thing in 24 hours or blah, 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 like tell me more about the situation. Most of those do not apply in restaurants. First of all, like the fact that you walked into a restaurant makes it not b'diavad. The fact that you placed an order makes it not b'diavad. Most utensils in restaurants are used every day of the week. So there, none of this like, oh, the flavor, you know, like the flavor became we have this idea of like eno ben yomo, that flavor becomes disgusting after 24 hours of sitting inside of a utensil. That's a huge kula. We only rely on it b'diavad in private people's homes, but you can't rely on it at all in a restaurant where you know every utensil is being used probably more than once every day. So some of those like big kashrut leniencies that will enable you to kind of like keep going when you made a mistake Erev Shabbos don't help you at all in restaurants. So that's the other thing. So even if all your ingredients are kosher, if it's cooked in a frying pan, you cannot assume that frying pan, you must assume that frying pan gave off non-kosher flavor to the thing that your new thing is being cooked in. Okay. So then the question is, okay, but what about vegan restaurants? Because in vegan restaurants, like everything I was just talking about applies to a restaurant where like I go in and I see on a vast menu that includes like pork chops and, you know, chicken parmesan, I see like one dish that seems like all the ingredients are kosher. Like that's kind of the situation I've been talking about until now. In a vegan restaurant, you're not looking at a menu and saying, wow, everything looks treif except this one thing, okay, I'll order this one thing, right? Like in a vegan restaurant, you open up the menu and you're like, cool, it's like vegetable number one or vegetable number two, like, and I can reasonably assume that the utensils therefore don't have absorbed flavor from non-kosher things because everything on the menu seems like it might be kosher. So vegan restaurants are relatively new, and there's a lot of conversation about vegan restaurants. Certainly, you have people who will give out hashgachot to vegan restaurants much more easily than they'll give to any other kind of restaurant because there, in fact, are way fewer problems. So you certainly don't need a mashgiach to be there all the time in the way you would with like a meat restaurant. But there still are some problems that you would want to be really careful about, and that would probably mean that you would only want to go to vegan restaurants that have hashgacha. So the first thing is, do we trust these people that they're actually putting in what they say they are. And the reason why I keep coming back to trust is because in an environment where someone is trying to turn profit off of food, trust is a really big problem because they have a very strong incentive to get the cheapest possible ingredients. So they might want to tell you, oh, like my meat substitute is this thing, but if they can find a cheaper one that's actually something else, like if no one's checking, then why wouldn't they do that? Like they have a bottom line to meet, and lying to customers seems less important than being able to pay your workers or something like that, right? Like those calculations come into effect in a real way when you're trying to run a business. And like you sometimes feel really bad for people when this stuff happens to them. Like, and it happens in kosher establishment or like kosher establishments too. Like my, I feel like 80% of the time I tell you stories about my Belle's cousins who live in Muncie, but like they don't eat Vishnitz meat because like apparently like the Vishnitz, like that's just another brand of Hasidim, the Vishnitz like had a big scandal where they were selling straightforwardly treif meat under like the Vishnitz hashgacha, and so now like the Belle's community doesn't eat the Vishnitz community's meat, right? Like this happens like even in like places where like the kashrut is like high on people's minds, like you have people trying to cheat, and that's the point of supervision. And so even if you don't have someone there 100% of the time, which like at Miltz, there's always a mashgiach there. The CRC does not give mashgiach to fleishig places. I don't know what they do with milchig places without a full-time mashgiach, and that is normal. Like very few, almost, I can't think of anyone who gives hashgacha to a meat place that doesn't have a full-time mashgiach, because you're dealing with expensive ingredients and the like urge to cheat is just really high, and like that makes a lot of sense. And so too, by the way, so even in a vegan place, right? So this cuts to bugs for a second, but even in a vegan place, like if you get an entire shipment of romaine and you have a bug checking protocol that you try and abide by, but it turns out really your entire shipment of romaine is infested. So like from a kashrut perspective, I would want you to throw out your entire infested shipment of romaine. But you spent money on this. Even if you can send it back and be like, you sent me, to your supplier and say like, you sent me this entire infested shipment of romaine, first of all, it's gonna take them a while to process that. You need to put romaine into the salads that you're like serving today, right? And you have a bottom line, and what if they won't reimburse you and blah, 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 right? Like there's a lot of incentive for somewhere that doesn't have supervision to cheat on that kind of thing also. So bugs are always a problem, and making sure that the place has like a strong, rigorous bug checking protocol would always be part of the hashgacha that someone would give to a vegan place. But like it ties into trust also, and that's why you would want not just like, we've agreed you're gonna check the shipments of romaine for bugs, and here's how you're gonna do it exactly. But more than that, like you would want someone who's really checking in, who feels totally entitled. Like I did hashgacha work at the kosher kitchen when I was an undergrad, and I would just like walk into the kitchen whenever I wanted and look around. And like that, right? Like you don't walk into a standard restaurant and do that. Like that's not considered polite or normal. But in like a kashrut supervision environment, like yeah, like surprise, I'm here now and I see you violating the bug policy. That's a really important part. And them knowing that you might show up at any time, and therefore that would be worth it for them to throw out the whole romaine shipment, because they know Ali, the mashgiach, could walk in right now and see me serving buggy romaine, and then I would lose my hashgacha, and then I would lose my business, right? Like it changes the whole risk calculation once you have supervision. So even with vegan restaurants, you still have a trust question. As I mentioned, you still have a bug problem. And you still can have a bishul problem, meaning they're still cooking. There are plants that cannot be eaten raw that a vegan person would eat that could be fancy. Or that could be made into a dish that would be fancy. So you still have a bishul question. And then the other big one is grape products. So a lot of people cook with wine. There's no reason, no one would buy kosher wine just for funsies to cook with. Like that is not a thing that exists. And vinegar is the other big one. So I mean, not all vinegar is made from grapes. Apple cider vinegar, not made from grapes. Just as one example, but balsamic is, red wine vinegar is, white wine vinegar is, whatever, right? Like many delicious vinegars that you have to buy usually from kosher companies or whatever, and that are sometimes harder to find kosher, like you know what those are. So a vegan place will also be serving vinegar. And vegan places also often are serving like things that are like pickled or brined or fermented. So those types of things also can have all sorts of just like stuff in them, right? Like you don't, like sometimes you'll just pickle things in like water and salt, but usually there's like some kind of vinegar in there and there's like other kinds of like herbs and spices and God knows what. And that makes things delicious, but again, like fermentation is considered a cooking process in halakha. So that you're not just like eating something raw when you're eating a piece of fermented kraut or whatever it is that you're eating. So that is another, so those are just some like reasons why it's like again, the bar with vegan restaurants is much lower, it's much easier to give hashgacha to vegan restaurants, but you would still want your vegan restaurant to have hashgacha. Okay, so now we get to this next piece, which is, okay, but like I work for a company, let's say I'm a consultant, my team goes out to eat together, and if I don't go out to eat with my team, I'm going to be seen as unfriendly or like not collegial, or there will be professional ramifications, or we wine and dine our clients, and I have to be there. So like in New York, that like dynamic keeps fancy kosher restaurants in business. Meaning like all the midtown fancy meat places are kept in business by lawyers and consultants who have to wine and dine their colleagues or their clients, who like then take them out to like Lower A or whatever, and like that's how you keep an entire industry in New York City afloat. So like that's great, but I live in Boston, I live in Chicago, and my client doesn't want to go to Shallott's, which is in the middle of nowhere, right? So like, okay, so my boss is not sympathetic to like my inability to eat at these restaurants. So what do I do, right? So, and I think that for many people that's a live question. In Boston, it was like slightly less live because there's such a strong culture of like people going home from work at the end of the day. Whereas like in New York, it's like, what do you mean home? Work doesn't end, sleep here. But it definitely does come up. So here's some questions. And then we're gonna look at a really cool tshuva by Rav Moshe as part of this section. So the first question is Marit Ayin, right? Are people going to see me walking into this restaurant? And meaning Marit Ayin is complicated in a lot of ways. Like we sometimes talk about Marit Ayin as like, oh, other Jews will see me doing this thing and then they'll think it's okay. But actually, Marit Ayin applies even in private. Like even if no one's gonna see you doing something, if it just like looks like something that's against halacha, then for the most part you shouldn't do it. There are certain even in the Talmud discusses a case of like you fell into a puddle on Shabbos and you go home with wet clothes and you want to like lay your clothes out. So it's gonna look like you did laundry on Shabbos, even though it's in the privacy of your own home and whatever. So like that's kind of like the Talmud's like test case: are you allowed to lay your clothes out? And the answer is like yes. But Marit Ayin again, like we could have like you could spend a long time studying the rules of Marit Ayin, but like just like that's a misconception that Marit Ayin is only about what will other Jews think of me. Marit Ayin applies primarily also in private, but the main like source of halachic leniency in terms of Marit Ayin are Rishonim and Achronim who think that Marit Ayin only applies to specific cases described in the Talmud, which then like restaurants didn't really exist. So this would not be one of the cases that is described in the Talmud. So turn over the sheet. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to translate. I usually translate everything, but I didn't get a chance to. But the one that, the Igrot Moshe, which is the one that looks like, and in fact is a screenshot of the Igrot Moshe. Okay, so I'll read slowly and translate. So he's describing more or less our case. He'll tell you what the case is. Ubedavar im mutar le'echol berestaurants So, whether you're permitted to eat in restaurants, shemichinim sham rak ma'achalei chalav, where it's a vegetarian restaurant, it's a dairy restaurant. They only prepare, let's call it vegetarian. I think if you told a non-Jew, oh, let's go to a dairy restaurant, they'd be like, what is a dairy restaurant? So they only prepare their vegetarian food. Aval hamshal anashim mechalei Shabbat. So maybe it's Jewish owned, but they are Sabbath violators. And even there could still be prohibited foods. Maybe they serve not kosher types of fish. So the oil that they use for frying. Maybe that oil is from not kosher animals. And they have cheese, but the cheese is prohibited cheese. And they also serve food that is prohibited because of bishul akum. So to go in there and eat things that are known that there is no smidgen of prohibition in, and there's no reason to be concerned about the type of food that you're exactly eating. And so maybe you should prohibit that because of marit ayin and because of suspicion. But if you're very hungry, and you're really upset, and there's no other place to get food, you can go in there and you can eat things that are known to be permitted. But you have to do it in private. Because in a place where you're suffering, you don't have a rabbinic prohibition. So he's saying because you're suffering, or because there's need and loss, and that loss piece I think is really important for the work conversation. So then maybe this rabbinic concern about marit ayin wouldn't apply there. But he says, how do you get around it? No one who's outside the restaurant should recognize anyone. There shouldn't be anyone outside the restaurant who recognizes you. Anyone you see inside there, well, they'll see what you're ordering, so that's okay because they'll know that you're only getting permitted foods. And if there's someone outside that you know, then then you have to go over and say to them, yeah, it's I'm really hungry, I'm starving, I have to go get food. And that's why I'm going into there. And I'm only going in there to get permitted food item. But if you don't have this great need, then you shouldn't go in there at all. You don't make your own Moshe Feinstein. This is at the end, by the way. This is basically, I brought you everything he has to say on this subject. This gets lobbed on to the end of a longer tshuva on a totally different subject that he's writing to the same person. So this is kind of it. There's no dots involved here. So what Rav Moshe says is, I think applicable more or less to any restaurant that you have to go into. You shouldn't just go into that restaurant if you have to go into that restaurant because you'll suffer some kind of business loss, like what we described. I'll lose a client, I'll lose a job, I won't be able to get a promotion because my boss won't like me, things like that. So that's discomfort, that is financial loss that I think would play out more or less the same way as what he's describing here. But then you have a responsibility vis-a-vis other Jews. So a very common practice would be take off your yarmulke when you're going in. I think that's appropriate. I think if you see someone you know on the way in, you should definitely go over and say to them, hey, how's it going? It's so good to see you. This place is not kosher, and I'm going in because I'm here with work, and I'm just gonna drink a beer or whatever it is, right? And then once you're inside, if someone sees you and you're in the middle of a meeting, you don't necessarily need to worry about that person as much because that person is also already in there, and two, they'll see what you're actually eating, as opposed to someone who's outside who will just see, Leia's in this store, must mean the store is kosher, or must mean she doesn't keep kosher anymore, or whatever. So I think the way he lays that out is really useful for this conversation in terms of like, how does Marit Ayin play out? Marit Ayin is a concern, but it can be overcome in situations of need, such as for work. Okay, so now you're inside the restaurant. You made your apologies to the members of the shul you saw outside the restaurant. Now you're inside. So what happens now? So this is this is a very common situation, and the most important thing is to grow confident in yourself. To just be like, I keep kosher, I am here. Yes, my colleagues, I keep kosher. The more, if you're uncomfortable with the fact that everyone's ordering and you're not, then you're gonna make everyone around you uncomfortable. But if you're comfortable with it and you're like, I keep kosher, it was important for me to be here, so I'm here, ta-da, then everyone around you is gonna be like, cool, you're really confident in yourself, and I'm also confident in myself, and I respect that you have values. So a lot of this particular game, is when I was an undergrad, I was doing this all the time, and even though it seems my current job would not require me to do this, you would be right in that, but I'm always happy to give people pep talks about this exact situation. So if it comes up for you a lot, call me and we'll talk. Because I really, really think so much of it is the confidence in your Judaism that you give off to other people will garner respect from them and admiration from them for you and your tradition and the way you live your life and your dedication, right? They should say to you, oh my gosh, you're coming out to dinner and you can't eat anything. That's amazing, and I admire that about you. That should be what is the feeling that is elicited, vis-a-vis you and your commitment to Judaism in these situations. Okay, so what can you get? So drinks are always a good thing. There is some discussion about even drinking beer with non-Jews. I think in our community that is pretty common, but don't get drunk. That's for sure not an appropriate thing at a business. Oh, I don't know, whatever. Different businesses are different, but probably halachically you shouldn't be getting drunk with non-Jews. But also sodas are great, seltzer is great, water is good. We're gonna talk about coffee more in a minute because there's some just really cool literature about coffee. But just the bottom line on that is coffee is good, many people would get a beer, and that would be fine also. Okay, so then the other thing you can get, which again depends on what kind of restaurant you're at and whatever, would be uncooked, non-spicy fruits and vegetables. So meaning you could look at the list of salads and see there's a salad that has dressing on it and onions in it and whatever, and then you could say, but other than that, it has tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and all this not cooked stuff. In my opinion, you could say to the waiter, I would like this salad with no dressing, or please bring some olive oil and salt and pepper on the side, and no onions. Or even if it comes with the onions, you can pick the onions off because they're not cooked into the salad, and then you would just, as you're eating it, especially the lettuce part of that, you would just look at the pieces of lettuce pretty carefully before you're eating them, and that would be you could eat a salad, as long as nothing in it is the type of food that is harif that would absorb flavor just by being cut. So a tomato would not absorb flavor by being cut. A cucumber would not absorb flavor by being cut. However, some things that you might think oh, that belongs in a salad, beets. Well, beets are cooked before they go into a salad. Nobody eats raw beets. I don't know, maybe they do, but most of the time when people are serving beets, they're not raw. I should have thrown this into my list of harif things, but radishes are considered harif also, just when you're considering your salad options.
Isn't there an issue though, what if they use that knife for other stuff?
Good, so the knife needs to be clean, but it doesn't need to be, right, so you would have to, usually you would have to tell them please clean the knife before you do this.
Oh.
I have allergies. Yeah, but typically also I don't think it's so common for like someone who's in the like salad chopping area to like have used a knife on something that's so dirty that it would like transfer.
No, but I
over.
mean, like, let's say there's also salads there that have chicken in them. So they're chopping the chicken and then they're chopping the,
Right, and then they're
like,
chopping your tomato, so that would be a
tomatoes and-
problem.
right,
Yeah.
like, but you would never know that.
Right, so
Like, even if you tell them to clean it, they're not gonna think that that means.
I think we're very fortunate to like live in a world where like you can just tell people you have allergies and they like actually do what you say because they're afraid of killing you.
But like, there could be like chicken on the cutting board.
Yeah,
You
but
know what I mean? Like, it's not
if
like.
you were allergic to chicken, like that would be a problem for you also.
Right, but I think if you tell them, oh, can you clean the knife before, they're not gonna be like, let's clear anything that could possibly be on this before and this and that, like,
Okay,
I don't know, like trust, if you're saying like trust is an issue, to me that would be the more of an issue than trusting that like they're buying the ingredients you're saying.
For sure. So definitely right. Like trusting that like the utensils they're using are actually clean could be a problem. Truthfully, when you're talking about like a mix of things, when you have such a tiny amount as whatever might have like remained on the cutting board afterwards, there's probably bittul like you could imagine a world where there's like bittul happening there, that would be okay. But yeah, I mean, if you want to say like I really think like in any situation the chances of there being like chicken on the tomato that was cut at this place like are high enough. Like I personally am not convinced by that, but I think you could be convinced by it like that. Yeah. Right, and then also fruit. Would be another thing. Okay, so here's basically and then I'll circle back to coffee at the end because there's just like fun sources about it. And coffee in, and I'm also going to talk about coffee in like porcelain cups. Like, can I go to a coffee shop and like not have to use a to-go cup? But two things that I want to say that I think are really important for this conversation. One is, anytime you go out to a non-kosher restaurant and order food, you are like having a meal somewhere that is not supporting a Jewish institution. So let's say you're like, I keep kosher in my home and I don't keep kosher outside of my home. I would not support that position, but let's say that that's your position, but you really care about the Jewish community. Like in Lakeview, in the last like 3 years, we've seen 2 kosher establishments close. Like that is a bad thing. Like that is a bad thing. And anytime that kosher establishments close because, and could have been kept open by people not eating at non-kosher establishments and instead eating, yes, at kosher establishments, that's something to really think seriously about. Okay, so that is one. And then the other one is, the other piece of this is like a little bit less obvious, but actually I think like when I was an undergrad, I saw this play out, and I've seen this play out like really clearly in Orthodox communities in lots of places, which is that in places where kids grow up and their families eat hot dairy out, in the place that they live. Like, I mean, there's all different ways in which like people eat hot dairy out, like sociologically. Like there's people who like only eat hot dairy out when they're somewhere where there's like no kosher food, or like only when they're traveling, or only blah blah blah. But like let's say like when you're thinking about what you're gonna do for dinner, you would like either go to a kosher meat place, buy ingredients and cook at home, which would be kosher, or like go out to some non-kosher place and only eat dairy. What your children are learning from that is that, cool, I'm still a person who keeps kosher, and like it's good enough for my religious needs to not, like I can keep kosher anywhere under any circumstances because I can always go to a non-kosher restaurant and eat non-kosher food. So then that kid is thinking about, oh, I want to go to college. Well, like their limit of where they're going to go to college is not going to be limited to places that have kosher on offer, because they're like, okay, I'll just be a vegetarian for 4 years and I'll eat in the non-kosher dining halls and I'll eat dairy in those non-kosher dining halls for 4 years, and like it will be totally fine and everything will be great. Well, what happens to that person who then chooses to go to a university that doesn't have kosher food? Like, what is that person's relationship going to be like to an Orthodox community going forward? Like that, the prospects of that are not strong. Like if you spend 4 years of your life, the first time that you're independent, the first time that you're away from your parents, in a place that does not have enough of an Orthodox community to support a kosher dining hall, that's going to be really, really tough to then, after college, be like, yes, I actually still really care about being a member of an Orthodox community. Like, that is not a setup for success. But but it's consistent with someone who grows up eating hot dairy out, right? Because like, your whole life, like, oh, what did you do Saturday night? Oh, I went to this non-kosher restaurant and ate hot dairy out. So like, if that's just like one of the options for what you do at night for dinner growing up, then like, there's no reason why kosher food is going to play into your college decision, which then it means there's no reason why you're going to end up somewhere with an Orthodox community. And that is devastating for the future of Orthodox Jewry. So that is part of, along with just like a belief and love for halakha and whatever, like part of what like motivates the ferocity of my feelings about not eating hot dairy out is actually like a concern for people, for like kids who grow up in homes like that and the decisions that they make. And even if they end up in a campus that has Orthodox life, like Orthodox life is fostered by people spending time together. And if you could just as easily eat in a non-kosher dining hall for any meal, then you're not going to end up being part of that community either. So, okay. Anyways, I'll get off the horse about that. So just back to coffee for a second. So coffee shops were invented like in the 1700s, and in Prague, all these Jews were going out to coffee shops and being part of this like new culture of like, we go out to coffee shops and like talk about intellectual things and whatever. And so there was a letter sent to the Noda B'Yehuda about Jews, B'nai Torah, going out to coffee shops. So this is the top of the back here. So he says, Al davar kafe sholim shel inam Yehudim beKafe Heiser shelahem. So you have Jews going to eat in Kafe Heiser, and coffee houses of non-Jews. And the Noda B'Yehuda says, Yafeh hora le'isor she'in kan shum safek v'dai hem b'nei yoman shebekol shah shoti behem chalav shel ein yehudi v'heter shel kli sheni gam kein al kol panim l'chadchila asur. So he says that there's two main reasons why this is a problem. You can't say that, oh, the cups weren't used. There's no disposable cups in the 1700s. You can't say that the cups weren't used in the last 24 hours. And he doesn't, in the world of the Noda B'Yehuda, like not until Rav Moshe in America do you have people drinking the same milk as everyone else. Like until, like in the world of the Noda B'Yehuda, milk that Jews drink must be milked by Jews. Right, so there's no such thing as I go to the grocery store and buy unhechshered milk, which like I do all the time, and in America we do all the time. He does not have that. So the milk that people are putting into their coffee is then transferring into the coffee cups, and so he's saying there's no way to permit this. And then I'm in the fourth line down. Umashe yeshivo amishu shebeprag shotim b'nei Torah babatim shel ein Yehudim yada ro malato im hem b'nei Torah einam b'nei Yira. He says, you wrote to me and you said that these like knowledgeable, learned b'nei Torah are drinking this coffee. Well, maybe they know a lot of Torah, but they don't fear God. Vehema kali dat ulehalach lamasa b'derech b'ushpija. Vehema kali dat. Period. And they haven't learned enough. They don't know enough. They're not keeping halacha. But he does say, but practically speaking, for practical halacha, b'derech b'ushpiza, if you're traveling, this is interesting because usually I would say like kashrut when you're traveling is the same as kashrut at home. But in this one case, he's going to say, if you're traveling and you're at a hotel, she'in sham kelim achirim, and there's no Jews around and there's no other dishes you could possibly choose, then you're in a diavad situation in which maybe you can use their cups to drink their coffee. But in the city where, right, because you could rely maybe on like it's a b'diavad situation, so maybe I can assume the cup hasn't been used in 24 hours, or maybe I can say this is for sure always a klisheni, which I haven't talked about, but like that's one of the ways you can get around transfer of flavors if it's in a klisheni. You normally think of klisheni as a Shabbos thing. It's also a kashrus thing, surprise. And so he says maybe there's leniency if you're traveling. And then he goes on to say, I spoke with Harav Hamaor Hagadol Morinu Harav Meir Fishelis, who, it's actually a really sad story. He was apparently like a huge Talmid Chacham and wrote tons of tshuvot, and then like his house burned down or something, and all of it. So like we don't really know. All we know about him is from quotations in the Noda B'Yehuda, because none of his writings were preserved. I know, it's really sad. It happened all the time to people. Like there's all these people who were wiped out of Jewish history because of fires. Really sad. So anyways, he appears a few times in the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda thought very highly of him, and he was like well beloved as a rabbi in the Prague community. So he was trying to like say, Ulai mekilin v'huil v'lo shchiach halav tamei v'kedat ha'pri chadash. So he says, so he was trying to say, well, maybe because non-kosher milk is like, you know, most of the milk that's coming our way is like actually cow milk and not from non-kosher animals. So maybe it's like fine. But the Noda B'Yehuda says, I understand that he thinks that, but lo ratziti lachnis atzmi u'latir b'zeh, but I don't want to go that way. Umi shekoch b'yado la'afrushei mi'isura mitzvah rabba avid. And whoever has the ability to kind of tell people not to do prohibited things, that is a really good thing to do. Anyway, so what's interesting about the Noda B'Yehuda here is that the whole thing is about the milk and the coffee. Whereas in America, any coffee shop you'll go into, like unless you are a person who holds by Chalav Yisrael, which most people in our community are not, the milk is actually not a concern. None of the milk options are concerns, and so possibly what that means is that if the main concern that they have is actually about the milk, and we don't have a concern about the milk, then possibly you can actually use the cups. And Rabbi Yosef says the same thing. He is concerned about Chalav Yisrael, so he says only in a time when you can't use a to-go cup and you can't use glass could you use a porcelain cup. This is the last one on here that I didn't just read. But that's all premised on concerns about milk and not premised on other concerns, which would mean that in a coffee shop you probably could use a regular cup. The only element of concern is if it's a place where there's where every day without fail for sure people are ordering things that involve non-kosher flavors. So then that would then affect the cups and you.
So you mean like coffee at like a restaurant?
Coffee at a restaurant. Yeah, right.
Like if you went with like your coworkers to a non-kosher restaurant and ordered coffee.
Right. It would probably be fine to use. It would potentially be fine to use. I mean, you could still construct a world in which the way they do their dishes is like so egregious that the cup, from the dishwashing process, the cup absorbs trafe, but the chances of that are very slim. So but especially in a coffee shop where they're not doing the dishes with anything else, then particularly you could. In a restaurant might be slightly more complicated, but I think for the most part, you could probably, even at a restaurant, use their coffee cups. Okay, cool. So I'm over time, I think, by a few minutes. But yeah, thanks for coming out. Definitely happy to answer more questions about this, or as situations arise in which going to, I don't know, non-kosher establishments is a necessity for you in some way. Happy to help you think it through. It's also worth, especially in major cities, let's say you have to go to a wedding of a non-Jewish friend or coworker. Often non-kosher caterers or wedding venues have relationships with kosher caterers, and they can get you one kosher meal or something like that. And then it's again about the confidence of I'm gonna sit here and saw through my triple wrap thing, and how am I gonna explain it to the person next to me? And everyone has hilarious stories about that, because also then you don't really know whatever. I was at a wedding this summer, and they brought out 3 dishes for dessert, 3 small plates, all stacked on top of each other, all quadruple wrapped around each other. So you have to saw through all the things, separate out the plates, and then you still don't know what's on them. So one thing is clearly cake, and then one thing kind of looked like a piece of cheese, and the food had been parve until now. So I was oh, maybe there's a cheese course built in, and it turned out to just be a block of butter the size of my cell phone. And I was kind of took a forkful of, and I was this was a mistake. Anyways, whatever. But like, again, like it's sort of like owning that like I have special food needs and like you're all gonna respect it and here I go, like watch me saw through my like quadruple wrap thing. But it's worth it because then you actually get to eat at something as opposed to not. And you know, sometimes the food's not so disgusting that they bring out either. So. But I'm always happy to like coach and support.
Is there like issues like if you know, like I remember like there was a place in New York where like someone found out that like the baked goods that they got at the coffee shop were ordered from somewhere with a hechsher. Like they come packaged and they have hechsher and then they like put them out. Or like, you know, like let's say a frozen yogurt place, like the mix they use to make the frozen yogurt has a hechsher on it. Like, are there any issues with like those types of things where you like know it's a hechsher?
Great question. So in the coffee shop, you would just want to know exactly like how it got from point A to point B, and then pretty regularly you'd want to like ask to make sure that their supply
Like,
stream is still the same.
Place. Yeah.
Yeah, but and like if they're heating it, like often baked goods get reheated. Like, oh, you could ask for or they might assume like you want your muffin warmed up before I give it to you, and then you're in trouble the minute they're heating anything for you. But if it's literally like we get in a box, we take stuff out of the box and put it on this tray, then we hand it to you.
Right.
So like there's a world in which that's completely fine. But again, you'd want to like really be up on like making sure that.
Right.
The baked goods. And often you can encourage a place like that to actually get some kind of like certification. Like there was a place in Riverdale, like a sign, yeah, there was a place in Riverdale that opened up that their baked goods were kosher and like people convinced them to get a sign saying like our baked goods are from this place as of this date.
It's like only the baked goods, yeah.
Right, exactly. And then, yeah, so for a froyo place, again, like the froyo places change up their flavors all the time, and so even like there are, I'm pretty sure like there are froyo distributors that like some of their flavors are kosher and some are not, which makes a lot of sense. Like grape flavored froyo, chances are not kosher, right? So, but like that same company could provide, you know, vanilla that 100% is. So you want to look into like how do they clean between flavors? Chances are they actually really do clean between flavors because it's gross otherwise.
Yeah.
So like it could be like, but you would want to find out how do they clean between flavors, and then any flavor that you would get, you would just want to check. And sometimes, like again, like I've mostly seen this in New York, but I think actually in Tucson I saw it also. There was a froyo place where they would mark the kosher flavors, like similar to what they do at.
Forever Yogurt has.
Yeah, so right, so we have that here also. I've never been to Forever Yogurt.
Windy City Sweets.
Right, so that's what I was going to say. Windy City does that.
Yeah.
And if you're ever at Windy City and you're like, are you sure this is kosher? They'll show you, they'll prove it to you. And you should feel free to do that.
Yeah, 'cause I once asked where my little patent is there, chocolate kosher. And he said, ask to see the box of mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Windy City is very used to our community, and they'll do that for anything. Like literally, like I was there one time and I noticed that the gummy bears were marked kosher, and I was like, no way. And they were like, here's the box. Like they were super prepared for me to ask them questions. And so places like that, like you just have to feel confident enough to bother them.
Right.
And that's like a piece of it. But also like because they want your business, usually places are open to being annoyed.
Right.
Within reason, you know. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So feel free to like be in touch with questions and whatever. I think this subject is like really important for many reasons, but most importantly because keeping kosher is really important, and many mitzvot d'oraita are involved in keeping kosher, and also because supporting Jewish community and Jewish infrastructure through food is really important. So just to round that. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.